Righto, let's do bottom bracket 101. So bottom bracket is a generic name for the bearing axle assembly that lives in between the pedals. I'm going to try and do this historically from oldest to newest. Here. Okay, so this one here is what we call a one-piece crank or OPC. You can see the whole assembly is a single piece, and it uses these big wide press-in cups with a caged bearing that sits in it. So the bearing sits here on this side, another bearing on the other side, and probably the sprocket is in behind here, held on these little hex nuts that you can see. There's a couple of different systems for this, but mostly it's pretty much this. Now this is a really old design. Dinosaurs had these on their bikes. They've been around forever and they are still in existence. Lots of really budget kids bikes and BMX bikes are still built with one-piece cranks. Okay, don't know when, but I'm going to guess at probably 80s. The BMX industry came up with, well, the BMX category, if you like, came up with this idea of a three-piece crank. So this spindle here sits on a very long crank bolt. You've got two bearings pressed into the frame. You've got a spacer in between the bearings. And then the cranks, one on each side. Right, you can see how it works. Okay, and then this crank here is where the sprocket goes. So front chainring goes on here and a bolt through to lock it into place. Again, three-piece crank, really common, still in use today. You see it on lots of mid-range and even high-end BMXs. We'll use a three-piece crank of this style. Because this spindle will float, it'll float in the bottom bracket shell. You actually control the end float. You've got a couple of threaded crank bolts, obviously they're going to do the work of control. But you've got on either end some spacers that will be a thin sort of 2mm version. There might be a 3 or 5mm version in the packet. And those spacers sit out on the end here on the outside of the crank and sometimes in between the crank and the bearing. And what they do is once the cranks are tensioned up this way with the two crank bolts, then that's how you control end float of the crank. So it does require some skill putting these ones together, but a very, very common system long before everything. Road bikes were the original. And most of what we're going to look at today is sort of a spin-off of the evolution of road bikes. But this one that we're going to look at now is a really common standard in mountain bikes, hybrids, not so much in road bikes anymore. Really really basic models might have a 2x system, but you very rarely see 3x. In each side of the bottom bracket shell, there's this screw-in cup, and then a greased bearing sits inside the cup, and then this bottom bracket spins inside there. So you can see if we've got one of those on both sides, they screw into the bottom bracket shell, and then there's a lock ring that locks this one down. So you tension it up so that there's no end float or lateral float, is it? Lateral, anyway, the bottom bracket is spinning smoothly and cleanly with no movement. This is really common. You still see this on the really budget sort of $300 and $400 bikes. It's a terrible system. It wears quickly. It's not really sealed properly. And the life of this is really short, especially in a mountain bike that gets mistreated or left out in the weather. So Shimano replaced this system with, and you can see this one is the same thing. It's a little different in length, but I'll show you the length variations. This system here replaces, right? You can see the threads there are the same. What happens when we get bikes into the workshop with these systems in them? I take them out, I throw them in the bin, and I replace it with a sealed cartridge bottom bracket. That one there will, I don't know, I don't know what its lifespan is. If it's looked after, if it's treated well, I think it's certainly 10,000 Ks. Is it 20,000 Ks? It probably is. This system has seal bearings. It's quite a, it's got all of its own internal seals, proper sealed roller bearing, and these ones. So this is a 113, which is this one here, and instead of using a nut on the end of the spindle, this system uses a bolt. So the crank that uses this original one, and then you just pop a crank bolt in the end there. This is a fantastic system. I love it all the time, and it's like, I don't know, if the job goes well, it's like a $60 repair to replace this junk with this really quality unit. And you can make it even cheaper because you can buy these. I mean, this is a genuine Shimano, you can see. But this thing here, it's probably only $25 retail. And so this one is 113, as you can see, and it shows you left and right, of course, because the threads are opposite. They also do them in a 118 and a 122. And these three sizes, broadly speaking, represent single front chainring, double front chainring, and triple front chainring. The more chainrings there are, and this one that we've got here is a triple, 1, 2, 3. More chainrings there are, the further the crankset has to be away from the frame shell to make sure it clears everything. And so that's why you've got a longer spindle. Right, now I'm going to guess it in probably mid-90s. Shimano came up with a new sort of updated version of the three-piece system, and I think you can see it's got a hollow spindle. It's what they call Octolink. There's not a lot of Octolink because it got overtaken by Hollowtech pretty quickly, but Octolink, same story, uses a spline. This is the road version. Be careful, there is two versions of Octolink with different lengths of spline here. You can see that this crankset, it's Tiagra, it's designed for hybrids. So it uses the mountain bike standard, which has a much longer spline. Right, now while all this was going on, the road market was still reinventing the wheel, and Campagnolo, really popular Italian brand, sort of ruled road racing for decades, but got overtaken by Shimano probably 30 years ago, and now they're getting passed by SRAM, but that's just how it works. This is a crankset off one of our old Eddie Merckx's. The difference with Campagnolo is their bottom brackets, whilst they're still square taper, they don't use the same taper dimensions as the Shimano stuff. So the Shimano tapers are, I think they're referred to as JS or Japan Standard, or and these ones you will see them referred to as Italian. So you can see here, this one is bottom bracket 102 Italian thread, which means it'll have the threading for the Italian bottom bracket shells, and it'll have the correct taper for these. Okay, now let's have a look at what is by far the biggest playing system in the bicycle market today. It's in everything: road, mountain, gravel, CX, everything. It's by far the most popular system out there, but I think it's It's going to be soon enough overtaken by SRAM, but Shimano, this is a Q's, which is one of their model families. This is the Shimano design they call Holotech 2. So Holotech, or HT, is a two-piece design where the chainring is connected to the drive side crank, which has an integrated spindle, and you can see that it's hollow like we did with Holotech before. So Holotech 2, 24mm standard, 24 at both ends. That seems to be enough for most applications. And it uses a threaded bottom bracket. So the same concept. Bottom bracket screws into both sides of the shell. So this one will come apart. So the bottom bracket screws in from either side. Seats nicely, and then you use an arrangement of spacers on either side. And sometimes if you've got a narrow shell, you might have a spacer on the inside of the bottom bracket where it screws onto the shell. But really common standard in all categories. So the way it works is bottom bracket is either threaded. There's also press fit versions. So sometimes in the frame, the carbon frames will just use a press fit where you just push this into the frame and knock them out to replace it. It's a nice easy system, not as durable as a threaded variant, but still very popular, especially because it saves weight. Now, the one thing I will, while we're here and I've laid out these tools, is to show you that there is so many iterations of this in terms of sizing, the number of notches, and we can see here that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different tools, and I recently, that one there, which is a new it's a new bottom bracket from Across, the German manufacturer, and I didn't have a tool for that one, which I've got to get. So the mountain bikes are all pretty common. They use this one, and then the road is a bit smaller, the road version. It's still theoretically interchangeable. The mountain bike bottom brackets will go into gravel bikes, for example. Road, you can the crankset won't care which version of this. It only cares that you've got the correct number of spacers either end, because once this is installed, crank goes on this side, end float is controlled by this plastic cap here, and I've got it set up already on the tool. So when that plastic cap is screwed in, it controls the end float of the crankset inside the bottom bracket. There's actually no tension on this. It doesn't really require a tool. You can sort of do it up with your finger. Right, now before we move on from Shimano Holotech, I want to show you there's a couple of other 24mm standards, which is Raceface X-Type, and it comes as either a press fit or a threaded bottom bracket. And there's also FSA's Mega EXO. These are all 24mm standards, and there is a range of compatibility with Shimano Holotech. It doesn't always work. And pretty much what I do here is, if it's a Raceface crank, I'll use a Raceface BB. If it's an FS, and the same with if it's an FSA crank, or if it's a Shimano crank, I will match the BB to the crankset brand. But keep in mind, they're all 24mm and they're sort of interchangeable. Okay, we need to talk about BB30. Early 2000s Cannondale, in the normal Cannondale way, reinvented the wheel and came up with this idea of a 30mm bottom bracket spindle, 3-piece design, super lightweight. The intent of this was to produce a really simple, lightweight system that improved pedaling stiffness, and it did all those things, except it was creaky, and it's always been creaky. And if the shell facings aren't machined perfectly, then the spindles can start to wear. You can see this one's got a lot of wear on its thrust side, and this one probably didn't do a great deal of work. So they brought it out in their road system, right? Nice simple 3-piece design. They did a gravel variant of it, well, a mountain bike and or gravel variant, longer spindles, different systems for chainring retention. Actually, this one's on the wrong way. BB30 seemed like a fantastic idea at the time, and everybody loved it until it started creaking, and then brands started coming up with their own versions of it, and this one is going to be a bit of a footnote in the histories, really. Okay, it's January 2018 and SRAM, the clever cats, introduce a new bottom bracket standard they call DUB, Durable Universal Bottom Bracket. So DUB uses a 29mm 2-piece system. But the cool thing about DUB is that SRAM released the product, brought a whole bunch of cranksets and stuff to market, and they open sourced the bottom bracket spec so that anyone could use DUB spec, and companies could make their own DUB compatible bottom brackets, which was great because that's what brand marketing works on, right? So DUB is a 2-piece system. We can see that the original one used a 3-bolt pattern. Right-hand crank drive side, chainring is mounted directly to the inside of the crank. Sometimes you'll see a spider mounted to the crank, and then the chainring will have 4 or 5 bolts around the outside. But this one is a mountain bike. It's a Descendant DUB crankset. System goes together, screws up here with it's a self-extracting system, so you don't actually need the tool other than the 8mm hex. You don't need any special tools to extract this thing. Put the hex in there, wind it out, and it'll just pop this. It'll pop this drive side straight off the spindle. So opposite to the Shimano system, the spindle is integrated with the non-drive side crank arm. The drive side mounts on. There's a standard spec of bottom bracket, and again, SRAM makes them in all different variants. They make a BSA, they make a press fit. They do those in different lengths. They also make T47s. What else do they do? Anyway, SRAM make 4 or 5 versions of the DUB crankset, but they're all of the cranksets use the same spec. There is now actually a DUB wide, and this has happened in it's because of gravel we got wide, and this the Apex Rival Force and Red cranksets, which have been using DUB for a few years, when gravel bikes arrived and they were using 40, 45, 50 and even 55mm tyres, the standard road spacing on DUB wasn't enough, and so SRAM brought out a new standard they call DUB Wide. and this is to account for gravel road sets with really wide tyres. Now, the really cool thing about these modern E3 cranksets is you can buy a power meter left-hand crank. So the power meter is actually inside the spindle. That's what this is. This is a left-hand crank that we took out of a bike that was new, and we put a left-hand power meter spindle into it. So you can see the system is the same, right? It's just a little bit longer. I will show you. So this is a mountain bike. This one here is mountain bike, which is boost spacing, so it's wider than everything. And then there's this is a dub wide, and then there's also a standard dub road, which is narrower again. But it's a really clever system. So the way it works is that the crank tightens up on the right hand side. You torque it down to, I think it's 54. And then to control end float, you spin this threaded plastic ring here, and what that does is that takes out the end float of the crank. So you will have, before you put it in, you will already have set up a predetermined number of spaces that might either live on the inside of the BB shell. So you can see this one comes with a pair of 2.5mm spaces already loose on it. And SRAM's documentation is really good. It tells you everything. So if you just plug in your bottom bracket shell width and which crank you're using, and it'll tell you how many spaces to use and where. And also in the kit comes a large array of spaces that you can use behind. Sometimes you put them behind the left-hand side, and sometimes they go behind the right-hand side. But SRAM's documentation will tell you all of that. And once the crank's installed, tightened up on this side, you torque it up. Then you wind this one up until the float of the crank is taken up. And then there's a little, I hope you can see this, there's a little threaded screw there that clamps this down. So you're going to tighten this one up until the end float's taken out, and then you're going to tighten up that screw there, and that locks this threaded adjuster in place, and that's it. You're good to go. Now, before we move on from SRAM, we have to talk about GXP. So early 2000s, Truvativ, before SRAM owned them, Truvativ came up with this standard they called GXP, which stood for Giga X Pipe, I think it was. But anyway, I had this idea that GXP would be a better system, but it's actually a pain in the ass. And now I don't see it that much, GXP now. It's pretty much gone mostly, but it still does come up, and that's why we keep some bottom brackets in stock. We keep a BSA and a press fit version of them, because we do see them in the workshop sometimes. The painful part about GXP is that it uses a 22mm spindle on the non-drive side and a 24mm spindle. So the bearings are different in both sides, which, when it's not confusing, it's pretty easy, 22 and 24, but it's just a little bit more complicated and painful. And it uses a standard loading, and I've got one of these open. It's got this, they had this idea that having bearings different sizes, this is it's not going to show you in here, but what it uses is that on the non-drive side, it uses this wave washer concept so that you actually torque down the system, and that controls end float all in the one go. So there's not this secondary process of end float control of the crankset in the bottom bracket. And it worked okay, and it was possibly better than what was around at the time. I don't know, it was definitely different. And then SRAM bought Truvativ. 15 years later, they came up with dub, and I think that GXP is going to be another one of those standards that will be just a footnote in the bottom bracket history books. Righto, so there it is. That is bottom brackets 101. There's a bit of crankset 101 in there as well, but we didn't really talk that much about cranksets. If I've missed one of the standards, and I'm sure I will have, then drop us a comment. And if I need to, I'll add a extra piece. Thanks for watching.